Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for joining our Facebook Live, Twitter Live, and YouTube. My name is Marcela Howell. I am the president and CEO of In Our Own Voice, National Black Women's Reproductive Justice Agenda, a national state partnership with Black women's reproductive justice organizations across the country. And we are joined today, we are doing a series of panels on voting rights. And today we're going to concentrate on talking about voter suppression, which is very timely considering what we've been hearing in the news lately. And we're joined with a couple of wonderful experts on this. Stacey Abrams is a champion for voting rights and founder of Fair Fight PAC, which has initiated programs across the country, working with state parties to support voting rights and to address voter suppression. We're also joined by Latasha D. Mays, who is the founder and president CEO of New Voices for Reproductive Justice, a multi-state organization that works in Pennsylvania and Ohio and soon to take over the Rust Belt. And her organization is dedicated to working for the health and well-being of Black women, femmes, and girls. So as I said earlier, we are doing a series of panels on voting rights. We have an important election coming up in November that we want to encourage everyone to come out and vote. And so we thought we would just talk about some of the problems that are going on right now. Black women voters we are very, very familiar with all kinds of voting rights and all kinds of suppression that we have seen in our lifetime and before. And so this is nothing new. But I wanted to address my first question to Stacey. It's clear that voter suppression is a tactic being used and deployed both in the primary season and now also moving into the general election. And for November, does this seem different than the voter suppression that we have seen in other election cycles?
So I want to begin by saying thank you so much for including me in this conversation. And I want to issue set what voter suppression is, because I think it helps people contextualize what's happening now versus what's happened before. Voter suppression is any time you are prevented from or discouraged from voting. It's not about whether they try to get you to vote for one person over the other. That's just politics. But the machinery of democracy, the act of electing someone, you should not be prevented or discouraged from doing so if you are a citizen who holds that right. And the architecture of voter suppression has three forms. Can you register and stay on the rolls? Can you cast your ballot? And does your ballot get counted? And so under registration, are there hurdles that you have to jump through to even register to vote? If you live in Texas during COVID-19, the major hurdle is that a lot of the DMVs, a lot of the places you would normally register, shut down. And Texas is the largest state in the nation that will not permit online registration. So they've made it difficult to get on the rolls. Georgia and Ohio have a strong reputation for purging voters. So you can't stay on the rolls here. And so if you look across the country, different states have taken up tactics to make it harder to register and stay on the rolls. The second category is, can you cast a ballot? That is impeded when you have a voter ID law that's impossible or difficult to meet. And you hear this narrative, oh, you have to have an ID to buy a beer. It's actually easier to buy a beer than it is to execute a constitutional right in some states. Because, for example, in the state of Wisconsin, they passed a voter ID law that sent a 100-year-old Black woman home without being able to vote because she couldn't produce an original birth certificate because she was born during segregation and it was unlawful for her to get that certificate. So even though she could show them the census she was in 1930, in 2016, she was suddenly told she wasn't eligible to vote. And so we have to understand that restrictive voter ID laws are voter suppression. It is not about, can you prove who you are? It's, can you prove who you are jumping through the hoops they want to set? It's also the closure of polling places. If you look in Wisconsin, where in Milwaukee, in the midst of COVID-19 in April, they shut down all but 5 polling places, which may not sound bad until you realize that the last election they had 180 of them. In Georgia, they shut down so many polling places, we had 8-hour lines. And we saw the same thing happen in Kentucky when folks were beating on the door of the Civic Center, begging to come in to cast their ballot. So if the polling place is shut down, you can't cast your ballot. And what we're facing right now with absentee ballots, mail-in voting, is who can access it and under what conditions. And then the third is, does your ballot get counted? We know that Blacks and Latinos are twice as likely to have their absentee ballots rejected. That young people are 5 times more likely to have those ballots rejected. And we know that provisional ballots are disproportionately given to poor people, especially Black and brown poor people, and that people are given disinformation. And so your ballot doesn't count. The reason I give that architecture to answer this question is this has always been there. For the last 20 years, these rules they've been perfecting these rules. They've been tightening the rules. But for the last 20 years, starting with Georgia and Indiana in 2005, introducing restrictive voter ID, with the crescendo of the evisceration of the Voting Rights Act in 2013 that just opened the floodgates, we have seen new and different versions of the same story. So it's not that it's worse this year maybe than before, because we fixed some things and some things have gotten worse. What's different is we know. And knowledge is what is causing the panic. Because in years past, what has been so effective about voter suppression is it looked like administrative rules and it looked like user error. Individuals who've been trying to traverse these obstacles for decades have been taught that it was just them. It was their fault. If you were smarter, if you paid more attention, if you were willing to do the work, you could vote. What we know now, and what we should have known for years if we'd been willing to talk about it out loud, is that voter suppression is built into the democratic system of America. It was there when we started, is there today, but the difference is they're no longer hiding their hands the way they have for the last 20 years. We have the President of the United States preaching voter suppression. The last time we saw something this egregious, it was during Jim Crow. And so what we have today is the public announcement of and the public confirmation of what millions of Black and brown folks could tell you has existed for years, which is that voter suppression is real and it matters more in this moment because it's an existential crisis and because we now see their dirty hands manipulating the system.
So where does the court come into this? Because in Georgia, when you ran for governor, the now Governor Kemp, who was the Secretary of State, purged people from the polls, and he also held registrations and refused to validate them. So where does the court come into this?
So if my election had been in 2012, what the court could have done was actually stop any of those things from happening or at least mitigate the harm. But with the evisceration of the Voting Rights Act, the ability to stop bad from happening before it occurs was essentially taken away. And because what Section 5 did was it said that you had to get clearance before you did bad. Now you just have to get accused of and they have to prove that you did it. And the problem is the remedy isn't that they undo the election. The remedy is that they say, bad, don't do it again, which doesn't matter if they just shift tactics but have the same strategic imperative. And unfortunately, in 2020, we have watched the Supreme Court on 5 different occasions suborn voter suppression. In Wisconsin, when they told people in the midst of a global pandemic, yes, you have to stand in line in the cold and contract a disease because we will not allow you the ability to vote from home the way the governor has intended. Although they gave us one small victory by saying that the absentee ballots could be counted if they were postmarked by a certain date. In Texas, in Alabama, they have pushed back against lower courts that have said we want to let people vote in the midst of a pandemic because those are states that limit who can vote by mail. The one good thing we've seen them do is just this week, they pushed back and actually refused to alter what's happened in Rhode Island. Rhode Island is allowing people to vote and making it easier. The Supreme Court declined to undo that action. But unfortunately, right now, the lower courts have been helpful, but it's the Supreme Court that is saying that the right to vote is not a real right in the United States.
Okay. So before I go to another question or bring Latasha in, I do want to encourage people because of voter purging, that they should actually go to vote.gov. You can go on there and check.
Vote.org. Vote.org.
Vote.org.
Yes.
Go on, check, and make sure that you are still registered. It's really important that you do that. Do it now, because the reality is that you will have time to re-register if for some reason your name is no longer there. So you need to go on to vote.org, make sure that you were registered, just put in your state. I've already done it to make sure I was there, because I'm taking nothing for granted. Even though I vote every single time, I'm going in there anyway and checking, but people should go and check. I want to talk a little bit about the post office.
Yes.
I mean, really, here we are talking about, we're in the middle of this global pandemic. People are concerned about going out in the street, going to the grocery store. They're concerned about sending their kids to school. And we are being told that we cannot use mail-in ballots. We can't send our vote in by mail, because the post office is telling every state that they cannot guarantee that they will deliver those ballots in time to be counted in the election. What do we do about this?
So again, let's start with the context, because what I want people to leave this conversation with is not just being able to read the news, but to understand why the news is new. And so prior to the start of the pandemic, there were 34 states where you could vote by mail. Call it mail-in balloting, call it vote from home, call it absentee balloting. It's all the same thing. You had the ability to get your ballot sent to you, and you had the ability to send that ballot back, filled out, and get it counted. That happened in 34 states. Over the last 6 months, through the concerted efforts of groups like mine, Fair Fight, the Leadership Conference, this extraordinary leadership by Mark Elias, this amazing attorney who's been filing suits, the Legal Defense Fund, the Lawyers Committee, all of these groups, the Advancement Project, have been suing to expand who has access to vote by mail. We started with 34, now we're at 42 states where you can vote by mail with no excuses. Well, in response, two things have happened. One is that the GOP has taken up the cause of trying to stop people from being able to vote. And let's be clear, voter suppression has been practiced by every political party since the dawn of time. But in the last 20 years, it's been almost exclusively the purview of Republicans. So I don't want people saying, well, Democrats used to do it. Yeah, now we don't. Now it's mostly Republicans, and it could change again, but we need to deal with what's happening. And in this space, the Republican Party, both through its secretaries of state, like the one in Georgia, through governors, through legislators, through attorneys general, they have made it difficult to vote by mail. And at the same time, they've been putting together these panels that have essentially argued that vote by mail is somehow fraudulent unless it's being used by people they like. At the exact same time, we saw about 3 months ago, Donald Trump started tweeting about how he didn't trust vote by mail, how it was rife with fraud. It is not. That is a bald-faced lie. Using conservative numbers, you have fewer than 1,000 people who've ever even been accused of vote by mail fraud, and that's out of more than 625 million ballots cast. So it's a lie that there is fraud that is worth any worry. But what is true is that there's an increase in demand and increase in usage. And so they started by trying to convince people that it wouldn't work because it was fraudulent. And when that didn't work, the president of the United States, for the first time in American history, decided to dismantle the post office in slow motion. He put into position of power his friend, Louis DeJoy, who is a fundraiser for the Republican National Committee, who is a logistics expert. And apparently in this context, he is using his expertise to break the logistical efficiency of the post office. He has done so by removing sorting machines. He has done so by saying that you can't make more than one trip to deliver mail. He has done so by saying that the traditional practice of the post office of giving priority to election mail, using bulk rate cost, but giving it first-class treatment because democracy is kind of important in this country, he has now said you can't do that anymore. And he has made it harder for people to use the mail. It is so egregious that 46 states have been warned that they will not be able to have their ballots counted accurately if they rely on the post office. And so the president of the United States, suborned by the US Senate Republicans and by the head of the post office, have decided to steal the election by stopping the one methodology that is guaranteed to keep Americans safe. That's what's happening right now. And unfortunately, here are our responses are these. One, as soon as you can vote by mail, do so. If you go to vote.org or you can go to our website, fairfight.com, we can tell you when you start to vote by mail. In North Carolina, it starts on September 4th. Vote by mail as soon as you are eligible, as soon as your state starts it. But you need to know when your state does it, and you need to know the rules. So go to the websites, get the information, vote by mail. If you think that there may not be time, meaning you don't have an extra couple of weeks of your life to wait to get your ballot, you have to get your application, then you got to get your ballot. If you don't have about 3 weeks worth of time, then you need to make a plan for voting early. There are 40 states in the United States that let you vote early. If you're in those states, know when early voting starts and plan to vote early. Number 3, demand drop boxes. Every state has the authority to put drop boxes at public libraries, at county buildings. They should have drop boxes, and you need to demand them. Do not wait for them to offer. We need to be righteous in our indignation and intentional in our demands and demand drop boxes. So by the time your ballot gets to you, if they can't trust it in the post office to get it back, go drop it off. And the last thing is, if those 3 things don't work for you, make a plan to vote on election day. We cannot let this suppression win because they want you to be so overwhelmed by how hard it is that you decide not to bother. This is an existential election. And if we doubted it at all, they're willing to break the post office to win this election. That should tell you how seriously they're taking this.
Latasha, you are actually living in a state that doesn't have early voting. And one of those states, they got the letter saying your ballots, your mail-in ballots might not be delivered. What are you telling people on the ground as you're reaching out to Black women voters and their families?
Well, first, my honor to be on this panel tonight. Thank you for this opportunity. I just want to say that New Voices for Reproductive Justice is a proud founding partner of In Our Own Voice. And through our work together, we have been able to collaboratively reach Black women voters in Pennsylvania and Ohio through the Voice Your Vote project that New Voices administers, as well as the I Am a Voter campaign that we are working on collaboratively. This is our 7th election cycle, and the things that we have seen over the last 2 or 3 elections cycles have been really out of pocket, out of control, and really is a demonstration of where we are in terms of our democracy. For us, it is important that we reach, comprehensively reach, repeatedly reach Black women voters ages 18 to 49 in both Pennsylvania and Ohio. And these voters are less likely to vote or not likely to vote at all. So true Black women are the most active and participatory segment in our electorate. We know that we still have so much work to do in terms of building rebuilding our democracy and building the infrastructure that it takes. And so for us, we want to be with Black women voters on their voting journey, where they're going to encounter voter suppression at every stop. And that's truly our commitment. I think it's important to note that earlier today, concerning the post office, I saw a post online from the American Postal Worker Union that said, snow slashed out, rain slashed out, heat slashed out, night slashed out, fascism slashed out. And it said nothing stops the post office. And I thought that was really compelling. But let me tell you why nothing can stop the mail, because the United States Postal Service employs almost 500,000 people across this nation. They make sure that you get the most important things you need in your life delivered, from your business and personal correspondence to life-saving medicine to COVID-19 essentials to your ballot. So nothing stops the mail because 23% of the postal workers are Black folk. Black folk are going to make sure that you get your mail. And so such large percentages of Black postal workers are women as well. And we know that Black women deliver. And we so much so that we've been delivering since the 1890s with Mary Fields, AKA Stagecoach Mary, who at the age of 60 was delivering mail for the United States Postal Service. And she went above and beyond to deliver the mail. She never missed a day. And so I say that to you because it really is the ingenuity, the genius, and the magic of Black women in the bloodline of the United States Postal Service. And we see, in spite of Trump's efforts to stop the mail on election day by denying that $25 billion in stimulus for them, we have to understand that it's Black women who continue to be impacted in the Postal Service and those of us who are looking to cast our vote. And so the first thing we can do, we can stand with the postal workers and demand that the U.S. Senate give them their coins. At apw.org/save the post office, some of you, I'm sure, have seen the hashtag save the post office. It's incumbent upon us, because Black women are being impacted in the Postal Service who deliver for us, not only on election day, but every day of our lives. I do want to point out that this is also a note around, if we know there are higher proportions of Black women who are postal workers, and yesterday was Black Women's Equal Pay Day, then it's incumbent upon us to take action for them so that they can take action for us as we seek to cast our ballot. And really, the post office is one of the few institutions that actually equalizes pay. And I think that's just important to note and to add nuances to what's happening with the Postal Service right now. But just like Stagecoach Mary, we have to stand in the gaps. And I appreciate Leader Abrams for what you shared, because some of the work that we've done in Ohio, we had to literally create a system where we could deliver ballots to people's doors in a COVID-19 safe manner, and to be able to pick them up, because so many people, either they may not have had access to internet or printer or ink or postage. Postage was significant. And in Ohio, Ohio is not offering postage to return your ballot. So what is the effort on our part to ensure that anybody who wants to cast their vote via mail has postage? But if you look at Pennsylvania, where we did get the letter saying that our ballots, because of the time frame, they could not guarantee Thomas J. Marshall, he said to the Secretary of State, Catherine Bouquard, that it wouldn't be enough time. They recommend 7 days to get a person's ballot to them. And so with our time frame, it would be less than the time that they recommend for Pennsylvania to accept ballot applications as in a time frame that can turn them around quick enough for voters to receive them in order to return them in person on election day, because that's what you would be left with. And to do that by 8 p.m. on election day in Pennsylvania. So now the state has asked the Supreme Court to allow votes to be counted for up to 3 days after the election on November 3rd. And so I just really think this speaks to the undying need and concern and drive and motivation to suppress the votes of Black people and to suppress the votes of Black women. So I echo some of the recommendations that Leader Abrams recommended, but we have to stand in the gap. We have to be creative about how we're going to reach our family members, our friends, our colleagues, our coworkers. Now, while we may not be able to go to their houses and knock on their doors, we're still in touch. We're in touch via text and phone and email and social media. The best thing we can do is dispel every piece of misinformation that comes out. And so we're looking at interesting partnerships with radio stations, with our billboards that we're doing within our own voice in Philadelphia and Cleveland area. We want to create a hotline, because our phone bankers know what it takes for a person to vote as well as the state does. So for us, how do we create the things that we need for our communities? And for us, but especially with the primary, we considered this a COVID-19 relief effort because of how elections were being changed at the drop of a hat. In Ohio, I've never seen this before in my life, where the election was changed 3 times within less than 24 hours well, multiple times. I'm not going to say 3 times, but multiple times the plan was changed for Ohio's election. And while Pennsylvania had more time, because of what is going on in the world, the Black uprising, as we fight to defend Black lives, we were able to have ballots counted in Pennsylvania for up to 1 week after the election, as long as it was postmarked by the primary date. So that's kind of what's going on here in the ground. I believe in multiple drop box locations. You can't just have the Board of Elections be the only place that someone can deliver their ballot or mail their ballot. And that's not even, mailing is not even an option anymore. But we have to be creative. How do we get this information to our communities? And we must do so by any means necessary.
So let's talk a little bit more about what we actually do. We know what the problems are, and those problems are multiple. And I know that, Stacey, you have to leave soon, so I want to ask one last question of you. We know people are pushing back. Fair Fight is pushing back. New Voices is pushing back. There are organizations all over pushing back. Give me, what do we tell the average voter that they should do, who may not be in an organization, who's just going to work every day, but wants to come out and vote, knows just how crucial this election is to our well-being and the well-being of our communities? What do we tell them to do?
So I would say there are 3 things. Number 1 is that we have to not only make a plan to vote, we need to use every platform we have to encourage everyone we know to make a plan to vote. And it sounds simple, but we all know folks who keep meaning to do something, but they never get around to doing it. If we send them to vote.org, send them to fairfight.com, make certain that they know what the rules are where they live, and that they make a plan to vote. Make a plan and then make your backup plan, but know it and then share it. Create challenges amongst your communities to say, tell me what your plan to vote is, so that everyone is thinking about how they're going to navigate this, because they're counting on us giving up. They're counting on us being overwhelmed. They're counting on us believing lies. And so we need there to not only be truth, but we need a plan. And so that's the first thing. Make sure everyone has a plan to vote. Number 2, make sure everyone has a reason to vote. We kind of skip over that part. Those of us who know that we're going to do this, we'll move heaven and earth. We've got to be worried about the folks for whom COVID-19 isn't a conversation on MSNBC. It is the question of whether they can stay in their house. And so they need to understand that we have to connect the protest in the streets, the collapse in our communities, to the policies at the ballot box. There is not a savior who will be elected to fix everything for us. But we know that demons will keep their place if we don't expel them. And the only way to do that in a democracy is through an election. And so we need to make sure not people have a plan to vote, but a reason to vote. So ask them, like, what is the thing you're most worried about? If you're worried about whether you're going to have a job in 2021, do you want the man who said he doesn't care if you work, or somebody who's willing to put a recovery plan together that will make certain that you work? We have to have a reason to vote. And that reason should not just be about the presidency. We know, those of us in the reproductive choice and the reproductive justice space, we know that it's not the president and the Senate we worry about, it's who our state legislators are. Because if Roe v. Wade is overturned, that returns to the states the authority to make decisions about our bodies, not the federal government, the state government. So use our moments to tell people, what's your reason for voting? And if they tell you why they don't want to vote, don't fight with them and try to chastise them or shame them. Ask why. Listen to them. Give them space to be angry and despairing, and then just ask them to try one more time to see if better can happen. And then the third is, and it's not directly connected to voting today, but it is how we make certain we have power tomorrow. By God, fill out your census. Right now, Black communities are behind by up to 14%. And if they artificially end the census at the end of September, that means 15% of Black people could be erased from our story. And when we lose the census, when we're not included in the census, that means all the money for school lunches, for reproductive health issues, the extent to which this government cares about them, that money disappears. The money for hospitals disappears. The money for the roads in our communities disappear. The criminal justice reform money disappears. If they can erase our numbers, we lose our money, but we also lose our political power, because they will draw districts where they can say that Black people weren't affected because we didn't show up in the numbers. And like any story, if you're not in the story, then you're just an illusion. And if we want to be counted, we have to count ourselves in. And I've created an organization called Fair Count. If you want any information about making sure that the census gets done, please do that work, because we can't just wait for 2020 to save us. We got to save ourselves in 2021 and 2022 and 2024. And that means we have to fill out the census by September 30th. Those are the three things. Make a plan, have a reason, and fill out your census.
People can still go online and fill out their census?
Absolutely. And you can, if you can't do it online, if you have friends who don't have access to the internet, there's a phone number, so you can get the phone number for them. Share the number, you can call, they'll do it in multiple languages. There is no excuse to be erased from the census, because that's what they want. The last little tidbit I'll give you is that under federal law, they can draw those. Think about it this way. When they draw district lines, they can either put you in a room with people who care about reproductive justice, who care about environmental justice, who care about social justice, or put you in a room with people who say all lives matter. Those are political districts. Which district do you want to be drawn into? And if you are drawn out of the story, you're going to end up in the district that doesn't care about who you are, who you need to become.
Well, thank you very much, Stacey. As I said, I know that you have to leave, and this has been wonderful. And we want to thank you for not only your work, but for giving us a good rendition of exactly what we need to do, what voter suppression is about, what voting rights, more importantly, is about, and how we exercise that right through different ways. Mail-in vote, check your registration first, mail in your ballot early, do early voting, have a plan, and do the census. Yes, thank you very much. And hopefully you'll come back for one of our other panels when we get closer to the election and really do our get out the vote discussions, and make sure that all of our votes count.
Absolutely. Well, it's always a pleasure to be in communion with you, Marcela. Thank you for having me. Thank you to everyone, and go vote.
Thank you. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
So Latasha.
Yes, Marcela.
Latasha did mention that New Voices for Reproductive Justice is part of the partnership that In Our Own Voice, National Black Women's Reproductive Justice has. And I want to mention the other partner organizations that we have: Black Women for Wellness, Black Women's Health Imperative, New Voices, Sister Love in Georgia, Sister Reach in Tennessee, Spark Reproductive Justice Now, the AFIA Center in Texas, and Women with a Vision in Louisiana. We are strong, active Black women, femmes, girls, working to make sure that our communities are better, make sure that policies that impact our lives are policies that we can live with. And I want to thank you again, Latasha, for joining us today. So let's really talk about some of the things that are going on in terms of November. Yes. I mean, the election is 81 days away.
I know, don't say that to me.
Almost 80. We've got 80 days starting tomorrow to really make sure that we turn out in full force. Let's talk about what that's going to take.
Well, before I start, I just want to say shout out to all the In Our Own Voice partners. I love how so unapologetically Black and committed to reproductive justice we are as our guiding vision. And I think that is important for this election. I think that reproductive justice has come a long way in being a factor in how people think about elections and the issues they think about in elections. So when some of our organizations and the In Our Own Voice partnership, we're calling voters, we're talking to them about some of the most critical reproductive justice issues in this nation, whether it's Black maternal health or abortion access, or if it's about gender-based mass incarceration and so many other things, I think that is making the difference. Let me tell you, when Black women voters hear from New Voices, we're able to turn out the voters we contact over 70% of the time. We reliably reach Black women voters. In the past, the last number I have, we reliably reach Black women voters in our age range over 90% of the time. So reproductive justice is an innovation to how we engage Black women voters, Black folks in this democracy, not just elections, but how this democracy runs. And I think the other piece is integrated voter engagement, which means that unlike so many campaigns, whether it's a candidate campaign or a PAC-led campaign or even an issue-based campaign, coming into Black communities, asking for our vote with no intention of being there the day after Election Day. What's different is we don't parachute in as integrated voter engagement practitioners. We're there, we're in the communities, we're on that voting journey with the Black voters that we're engaging. And I just think that's important for framing what's about to happen in this election. So 80 days is a long time actually in campaign life and organizing life, but we must have the urgency of now. We must compel those that we organize and engage to take the steps needed now. If the post office is not going to reliably be able to help us cast our vote, then we, as we have done always, have to create a way out of no way and build the systems that it's going to take for us to exercise our vote. So we think about the Montgomery bus boycott. Out of nothing, they created a car share system that I'm sure they used on Election Day for those who were able to vote to get folks where they needed to be. And if that's just one example, but we have to go to voters. We can't expect them to come to us during two global pandemics, one against COVID-19 and one against white supremacy. And so I think we have to be creative and not wait on anybody else to help us in casting our vote on November 3rd.
So what do you say to young Black voters who say basically, okay, so we've got a Biden-Harris ticket versus a Trump-Pence ticket. I'm not all that enthusiastic about either of them. Why should I go out and vote?
Well, I think if all voting is local, we have to remove it from just a presidential election. We really have to ask the question of what's important to them. And when we ask them that question, we're able to evoke different responses that we're able to connect to why their vote matters in general, not just in the presidential campaign, but for all your state representatives that are about to be elected who make critical decisions that are important, that are connected to issues important to them. I think that we have to have messengers who are relevant, who are connected to the culture. I mean, we have to use culture. We can't be afraid to use culture to reach the audiences we want to reach, but we have to be authentic. We have to talk about issues that come from those we're trying to reach, and we have to stay the course. Again, we can't parachute in and say, oh, you should vote, you should register to vote, but we don't give them any opportunity for leadership beyond that. And in this moment, in this particular moment where the reproductive justice movement and the movement for Black lives are so fiercely aligned, how are we using this moment to engage people not only around organizing in their communities, but to intersect that with electoral justice? And I love that work that is being done in the movement for Black lives, led by Jessica Bird and her two co-founders. So I think that's where we are. We have to make it make sense for young people, make it connect to what's going on in the world right in this moment. Not even in 80 days, but in this moment. This is how elections can impact your life. This is what a voting journey can mean. It's not just one vote on one day. It's about what do you want to see in your own life, in your family's life, and in your community's life.
Okay, and for those of you who are listening to us, if you have any questions you want to ask, please put them in our chat. Feel free to ask questions in the comment section so that we can get Latasha to talk about, respond to you. I'll respond to some, but basically, we do have some more questions. I would like to know, I guess I want to talk a little bit more about motivating people to vote. The one thing that we've seen in the protests around Black Lives Matters is there is this sense that people believe they can change the world, and that the protests are showing that. They're showing that we're having these different local authorities looking again at the police department and how they operate. We've got members of Congress introducing bills that talk about banning chokeholds and neck holds. We've got some movement going. Is that movement enough to compel people to the polls to vote and see that change happening as we elect other people at the local level, at the state level, to really make active change in our communities?
Well, I think we have to build the bridge. I don't think it's maybe organic to go from a orientation that's activism based, and in some ways organizing based. I think we have to build those bridges, and I think that is the long haul as well as the short term. If we're not using messaging in our organizing around voting, which we acknowledge is not the only way to make demands of our government, or when we want power to concede, we know that this is not the only way, but it's a significant way. And I think that if we don't have the infrastructure, the messaging, the resources even to make that connection, I think it won't happen on its own. I don't think people naturally go from an activism orientation to an electoral justice orientation unless you were already doing that, unless you were already voting. I guess I'm probably a super voter at this point. I've been voting, I think, since my 19th birthday. So for 20 years, and sadly almost missed an election. And I mean, it just like really did something to me, but that's not everybody's orientation. And we also can't shame people for either lack of interest or lack of knowledge or lack of motivation. I think that we have to engage those who are willing in this moment, but work towards building the long-term efforts to increase participation and ownership in our democracy. We've built this thing. We've built our democracy. And so we understand it and have a sense of ownership around it. I think that can make a difference, but I don't think it naturally happens on its own. We have to support people and lead people in doing that. And that just brings me to the exciting work, again, of the Movement for Black Lives and Electoral Justice Project, and the Black National Convention on August 28th. It's Black August anyway, but we're going to take it all the way to Black November. And that is the website, blacknovember.org, where delegations from across this nation will be ratifying a Movement for Black Lives Liberation platform. But that work comes out of the legacy and history of the 1972 Black National Convention, where we saw droves of Black people run and win elected office. And so I think it is so timely, and it really is in the spirit of Shirley Chisholm that we can stand in this similar kind of moment over 50 years later, and really work to build those bridges between electoral politics and electoral justice work and community organizing in this particular moment. So check out blacknovember.org. I think that's going to be compelling for what we see, not only for the election, but going forward. And New Voices was so proud to organize the delegation for Pennsylvania, incredible leaders from every part of our state, as well as co-lead organizing a delegation in Ohio with just the baddest organizers from around Ohio. It was truly an honor, and we're excited for what there is to come as we have to go deeper into our communities to bring this type of liberation agenda to those who do want to engage at this intersection of electoral justice and racial justice and reproductive justice.
So we have a question that is, do you have any resources to share for those who want to organize voters locally?
Well, for us, we are putting together a comprehensive hub, newvoicesrj.org/2020 elections, which will offer some resources. But right off the bat, something that was already discussed tonight is find out where people can drop their ballots, their vote by mail ballots. If there's only one place where that can happen, there has to be a movement to ensure that there's multiple locations. So in Philadelphia, I thought it was brilliant. It was broken down by city council district. So you had everything from libraries and schools, things that were open during COVID-19, to be able to cast your ballot in your neighborhood so you could walk there if you needed to, if you were able to walk there. I think that's an essential first step. Providing voter information to your networks, voter registration information to your networks is essential. Depending on what state you're in, you can go to your state's Department of State that typically administers elections, or even your county board of elections. But it just depends on where you live, honestly. All board of elections are not created equal. So you really want to be discerning around what information you do share. But sharing voter registration information right now is one of the most important things you can do, and providing that information on social media and through other platforms, even though we're not able to talk to each other right now. And so those are two places I would start. I would need to know more about where you live to be able to be more helpful. But hopefully the resources that we're going to be putting in our hub can be helpful to you. And it's important for people to understand how to track their ballot from the time that they submit their application for their ballot, to knowing whether the application was received, to knowing that their ballot was mailed, to knowing that their ballot was received. Another thing that I think people take for granted is some ballots are actually harder to fill out in real life than using an electronic machine. And as someone who has done this work for quite some time, I was filling out my ballot and I was like, wow, what if I had gotten this the same day? I might have been a little overwhelmed to fill it out. You have to put it in multiple envelopes. You have to make sure it's signed right, because they're using signatures that don't seem to match as a way to exclude votes. Like, it's a lot of pressure doing it at home. But I was just like, imagine if I got it the same day and had to get it to a polling location by 8 p.m. I mean, it was pretty stressful even for me. So I can't imagine what it is for those who may not have all the information that I have access to.
Right. And the other piece is to check what organizations are in your community that actually are doing it. There are organizations all over and who are working on voter registration, who are working on get out the vote, who are making sure that people do get absentee ballots, mail-in ballots. All of those organizations are local, and you should check with them, check around. As Latasha says, she's gonna, New Voices is gonna have a hub where you can go on there, find out what's in your state, what's in your community, and be able to, be a volunteer with them. The one thing that's different about this election is that we are doing all of the organizing virtually. That, normally somebody is knocking on your door, asking you if you're a registered voter. Well, if they're looking for you, and they usually have a list that says who's registered, who's voting all the time, who's not voting all the time. And they're asking you questions about whether or not you're planning on voting in this particular election. They can't do that right now because of COVID. So they are instead organizing at a different kind of level. They're online, they're sending out things through social media. If you're on any kind of social media, you can usually find people who are doing voter engagement on social media. All of our organizations in Our Own Voice has a campaign called I Am a Voter that we do, and that we have a lot of information on. Oops, there's our little sign. We have a lot of information on social media. We have a website called blackwomen.vote, where you can go on and get information about where to go and find out when you can do early voting in your state. And so as Stacey said, make a plan, make a backup plan, make sure you have a reason to vote. When you reach out to people in your family, in your community, that's the other thing, is that very often we talk about trying to get people to come out and vote, and we're talking about strangers. Check with your own family. Make sure everybody in your family is registered. Make sure they've checked their registration to make sure they're still on the voting rolls. Make sure they have a plan. This morning, my sister sent me a thing saying, okay, I'm picking you up on the first day of early voting in Maryland. Now, we vote in two totally different places, but she knows I don't go out during coronavirus. So she's picking me up. I'm going, she's going to vote. I'm going to vote. And that's just, make a plan, figure it out. Check with all your family members, check with your parents, your sisters and brothers, your nieces and nephews. Make sure that they are registered to vote, and ask them on their social media to check with their friends, people they went to school with. Everybody has some kind of social media contacts, and that's the way we have to organize. That's the way we have to make sure that people understand how to do things and how to get out there and vote, and really just making sure that Black women are out there voting. This election is too important not to. And we know it. We've had 4 years of a really bad administration, and we need to change that. In some states, we've had multiple years of really bad state legislatures, and we need to change those. And we can do that. We just have to make sure we vote, and that we organize, and that we get our friends to organize. So we're almost out of time, but I want to ask Latasha one more question. What is your number one advice for Black women looking to make an impact in November?
That's a really great question. And I had said something to someone just the other day, and it's kind of broken down into 3 parts. It's like, we must protect yourself, protect your vote, and protect the vote. Like that, those are important things that we can do in this election, as well as to remember that this is our democracy. This is ours, and that we built it, that we are the most active in it. We provide leadership to it. And again, back to what I said earlier, just this sense of ownership, because this democracy is already bought and paid for, and all we have to do is reclaim it. I mean, it was bought and paid for in our darkest hour when our African ancestors were stolen, enslaved, and dehumanized, and as well as by the genocide of indigenous people upon whose land we built this nation. I believe it was bought and paid for by the indignities, the humiliations, and threatened experiences of sexual violence that Black women endured, especially in the Jim Crow South. And it was bought and paid for on that bloody Sunday on the Edmund Pettus Bridge. It was bought and paid for by Shirley Chisholm, who I feel and know with all of my heart and soul is infinitely powerful, her life and her legacy. And that's the trail that she blazed for us into elected office across this country so many years ago, and now into our White House. And it's been bought and paid for by the centuries of killing of Black mothers, children at the hands of police and other state actors, leading up to this moment where the reproductive justice movement and the movement for Black lives converge in its reckoning against anti-Black racism and white supremacy. I think we have to remember that. That's what we're taking with us as we organize from this point forward. When we go to the proverbial poll on November 3rd, and for what comes after, whatever the result may be, because we cannot take for granted that, that it's going to be a certain outcome. We did that in 2016, and I will never forget the devastation in the land after the 2016 election. So we do not want a repeat of that. And I think that we are our own best advocates, activists, organizers, leaders. We cannot wait for anyone else. We are only waiting for ourselves. The reproductive justice movement is the movement that will engage and turn out Black women, voters, Black femmes, Black folks, young women across this nation to vote. Reproductive justice will be key as well.
And I want to make one last statement. The slogan that goes with I am a voter is my voice, my vote, our power. And that is the power of Black women's votes that have made a difference throughout history. This month is where white women celebrate getting the right to vote. The 19th Amendment being passed, it was not until 40 years later that Black women, who actually fought to get the right to vote in the 19th Amendment passed, but didn't get the right to vote then, got the right to vote. And we have been voting in large numbers ever since. But again, I am a voter means with being registered to vote comes the responsibility of not only casting that ballot, but holding elected officials accountable. And that we do better than anyone, is to confront those elected officials who make promises to us and then they break those promises. We need to protect our own lives. We need to make sure that our voices are heard, that our votes are cast, and that we walk away with the power that we deserve. I want to thank everybody for joining us today. As I said, this is the first in a series of these that we are going to be doing on voting rights. Our next one is September 28th, Monday, September 28th, during our Reproductive Justice Week of Action. If you want to find out how to get involved, we will have a calendar of events that are going on that all of our partner organizations listed on this, the banner you're seeing right now, will be doing different things in their communities. And we will be on social media urging people to join us, not only for that panel discussion on voting rights, on early voting, but also we will have an Instagram live program on that Tuesday, where we are going to have young people talking about their involvement in getting involved in voting. The reasons, as Stacey said, you got to have a reason to vote. They will talk about their reason for voting. So we want to thank you again for joining us today, and we look forward to seeing you again in September. Thank you very much. Go on our websites, our various different websites, and find out how you can get involved. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Latasha.
Thank you.